And I just think for me that was a real reminder of the brave men and women like yourself who go into these appalling environments and need to know that they have the backing of their government and the people they are fighting for. And in this case and others, and you mentioned Northern Ireland, and I'm a veteran from there, has shown that I think all too frequently we get forgotten.
We are back in the House of Commons today with another veteran in politics, and that is Richard Drax MP. In his office here in the old part of Parliament?
Yes, absolutely. Straight above the chamber almost, really.
Really? Oh. Well, how's your day been today? We had PMQs today?
Yes, no day is boring here. It's always a mixture of sometimes farce, sometimes common sense. Just occasionally pops his head through, but not nearly enough, in my humble opinion.
And you're just about to wrap as the House rises for recess as well?
Yeah, summer recess, yeah.
This should go out over summer recess, but we're on the last day of term, as it were, in Parliament today. So I'm really appreciate you giving me some time today, because it must be a bit of a ground rush as you close up the parliamentary office before you go off to recess. But as with all of our guests, we like to start at the beginning with the military story, because that's the thing that unites us. I too served in Northern Ireland as well, like yourself, and a lot of our listeners do come from the armed forces community background. Indeed, most of our guests as well. We're indeed called veterans in politics. So it makes sense. Your military story, where did that start, and why did you join the armed forces?
I joined the armed forces because I was so thick that I couldn't go to university, and quite plainly from the exam results, which were nil, I just needed maths O-level and 1 A-level, and I managed to scrape that. And all my friends were saying, what do we all do? We were all young and keen and fit, and they all said, let's go and join the army. And because the army was twice the size it is today.
So there was a group of you that decided that was the thing you
wanted?
Yes,
there was about 15, 20 of us who all knew each other. And it wasn't a collective decision as such, but we all ended up joining. And that was back in 1978. And then I spent 9 years, and I don't regret a single minute of it. And I've made lifelong friends, as Johnny, you have too. And all the veterans who listen to us, they appreciate the camaraderie that you have for the rest of your life in this extraordinary service of both Queen and country. And I just wish more young people would join up, because it would do them a power of good, in my view.
And what were the highlights of that time? So I've mentioned Northern Ireland. That was you spent a bit of time across the water?
Yes, I did 3 operational tours out there. And the first one I remember very clearly, because I went straight from Sandhurst. I literally passed out. I had 2 days off, and then on December the 28th, I think it was, I landed by ferry in Belfast and walked from a perfectly civil environment into the back of what veterans will remember as a pig. In effect, it's an armoured car, and was then driven to a place called McCrory Park, which was a company base just off the Falls Road, where I spent the next 2.5 months because I joined halfway through. And I simply couldn't believe, and looking back at it, I still find it hard, that this actually was my country, the United Kingdom. And here I was with 11 guardsmen armed with rifles and myself, with people trying to kill us. And obviously our job, as you well know, was to protect the civilian population, which we took great pride in doing.
And you were pretty young, right?
I was 20, if I recall.
Yeah.
And looking back at the photographs now, because you occasionally get contacted by ex-guardsmen who read about you in the papers as a politician. They say, oh, hello, sir, how are you? And I'm Guardsman Jones, and haven't seen you for 40 years, and so forth and so on. It's lovely. You occasionally get messages from the past, which is another example of this amazing camaraderie that's bred in the armed forces.
It's family, Well, I can really empathise with that. I was 18 when I went to West Belfast as an infantry. So I remember, I think there's a photo of me. It's like the first patrol photo, and I've got these massive spectacles on. I'm in front of a Land Rover APV, and with the ECM on my back, heavy kit. rifle, looking completely wet behind the ears. But I remember months later a similar photo being taken and looking completely different, physically a lot fitter, stronger, and just and streetwise. I think. I think for me that was the thing I learned about Belfast, was it the streetwiseness that it gave me to then. My dad, that cliche, and cliches are around for a reason, said to me, I went there as a boy and came back as a man.
I think that's very, very true, and that's why I think so many young people who are a bit listless at the moment and out of work and so forth, isn't it a shame that we can't encourage them or get them to join the armed forces for a year or two? Because having been at the Guards Depot for 2 years and training young men who came into us, and a lot of them had issues, within 6 months, when they passed out, the parents were saying, "What have you done to my son?" And you felt like saying, "Madam, nothing more than you should have done over the last 17 years. But of course you can't say that. But to me, this has been so apparent in my political life now, with the issues with the young, and there is a minority, of course, as you know, that cause problems. It's so easy to turn them around.
Yeah.
If you just give them a slight glimpse of the friendship, the discipline, the structure, something to look up to, the warrant officers and everybody else who we did as young soldiers, you are able, as you say, and particularly if you're in an operational environment, you go from a very immature, inexperienced young man, and you grow up.
Yeah.
And there's no other job I can think of that would create that opportunity, because any other job, sitting behind a desk in the city or a bank or wherever you might be, a lawyer, you never get that responsibility, ever, when you're 19, 20.
I gave a talk to some air cadets this week, and looking at their beaming faces, knowing that's where I started in the Army Cadets, looking at their beaming faces back at me. But I was just so impressed by them, because I think we do write young people off. Every young generation gets written off.
Yeah.
I think the World War I generation, World War II, when they were young people, got written off. The PlayStation generation went on to Afghanistan and Iraq as well, right? Yeah. So the media will always write off young people. But I was really encouraged by them and congratulated them on their service in uniform as young people, and just seeing how they were shaped, their communication skills, the conversations afterwards. They were just amazing, these people. And you're right, service. That byproduct of service, how it shapes you as a young person, is phenomenal. But you had quite a varied career as well, because particularly in the household division, you have ceremonial duties.
Yes.
So you've done the trooping of the colour?
I've done the trooping twice on parade, and the third time as a streetliner. And on parade, I have to say, it was a remarkable feeling as you go past and you give the slow salute with your sword to the Queen. As you look her straight in the eye, and it's the only time you'll probably ever do. And that moment, the guardsmen and all of us officers, your chest is out to about here. You just feel this is absolutely, and the music, of course, and the whole atmosphere. And I went back. I was asked by General James Bucknell, who's a good friend of mine, and the colonel of the regiment. He asked me back, not this year but last, and it's the first time he'd be back to the trooping. And I unashamedly sobbed. I mean, I just found the whole thing so emotional. And I think everyone else was too. I mean, there's something about when we do these things, no other nation can do it like this.
No, a bit more comfortable being not in all the uniform and being a spectator.
Yeah, not quite so hot.
For sure, yeah. But you went on and your civilian career, what was that transition like? 'Cause you went on to, I know you come from sort of a land management, rural economy background. What was the transition like for you leaving the armed forces into...
Well, it wasn't too bad, because I had to make a decision. Did I stay in the army or not? It was getting to the point of I'd done junior staff course, and then it was on to the senior one, and then you lose contact, as you know, with the men. You get into more staff roles, and I had to make a decision: did I want to do that or charter another career? And I thought, no, nice. I've had 9 fantastic years now at the time. So with that in mind, and yes, my father runs an estate, or did then, which I was going to inherit. I thought I'd better learn which end of the cow the milk comes out of, at least. So off I went to the Royal Agricultural College for 3 years, and passed out with a 2-1, so I was quite chuffed with that.
So you did all right
as a non-academic, so I was okay in the end.
You wrote yourself off there at the beginning, but so there was a
happy
ending to that.
Came back a bit. And then from there, I made it decision, rather than doing what everyone expected me to do, I would do what I wanted to do, and I always wanted to write and be a journalist. And to my father's amazement, I said I'm off, and it took me 9 months and writing to 300 local newspapers to eventually get a break. And I just kept going. And if there's anyone listening out there who's left the army and wants to go and do something, my advice, for what it's worth, is if you really want to do something, just keep going, knocking on doors, and eventually you will. And that opened up 17 years a career in the media and journalism, which I absolutely adore.
And I think we're pretty good at it as well in the military, because you learn how to communicate on the streets of West Belfast.
Yeah.
And you learn how to write as well, albeit in a fairly formulaic way for various military reports. And it's a bit of a common thread, because talking to Sir Mike Penning, Jason McCartney, are all people that have been served in the armed forces that went on into journalism as well. I mean, why do you think there's that pull? There seems to be a bit of a pull. We're used to working alongside journalists as well. You know, I've had journalists on patrol with me in Afghanistan. Deb Haynes came out and patrolled me in Afghanistan. So, I mean, what do you think? There seems to be a bit of a good fit there.
I think it's a connection with people, a curious mind, and a genuine interest in what goes on around you. And my ambition when I got the job, I went to go and see Sandy Gould, you may recall, on day one, and said, "I want your job, please." And he said, "I've been doing it for 35 years, Richard. I think you should start at the bottom." And that was with the local paper, which I went to and had 4 very happy years in York, with the Yorkshire Evening Press. So I think it's a combination of all these things. And yes, I think journalists and soldiers are not far apart. We love people and finding information and challenges, and some of them quite tough. And as a journalist, of course, you've got to get all sides to an argument, which is also interesting. You can't just be sort of slightly bigoted, perhaps, and say, I'm right and everyone else is wrong. No, you've got to go in as a neutral person and get all sides and then report it in a balanced way. And that's fascinating.
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed having journalists on patrol. In fact, there was a bit of a cultural chain of command issue of you've got journalists coming on to camp, be on your best behaviour, which obviously we're professional soldiers. But I really enjoyed that. Deb Haynes gave us a lecture, actually, in the patrol base. And I think that helped demystify what a journalist, what they're like. And funny enough, we had this young man from the Yorkshire Post come out and patrol with us, because I was attached to the Yorkshire Regiment.
Yes.
And he was brilliant. He wasn't a pain, having someone on patrol, and obviously we got to look after him and his security. But he just played the game, listened, did what he was told, and reported the story, the local story of the Yorkshire Regiment in Afghanistan. So he was brilliant. But all of these things, the skills that you learn in the armed forces, in journalism, land management, they must have helped prepare you to be a politician.
Well, I didn't want to be a politician. It's ironic I'm doing this. And I got the job because I was so concerned where the country was going, in my own view, that a friend said to me, Richard, you're becoming such a pain in the you-know-where. You sound like Victor Meldrew. For God's sake, go and become an MP and you can actually do something. So I thought, well, they'll never take me. I didn't quite fit the sort of maybe the modern image. So I stood for selection when the South Dorset came up, and to my utter amazement, against all the Cameron A-listers I was up against.
Yeah, I remember that well.
They selected me. David Cameron was not so chuffed with that, and he and I did not see eye to eye during his tenure. And then for 4 years later, in 2010, fought the election, and to my utter amazement, won the seat of South Dorset. So I was into this world, which I'm not accustomed to. And I have found it fascinating. It is very interesting. And I do think, yes, the life experience I've had, I think that's the word I would use, has proved very helpful. And if I was to be, again, advise anyone who wants to come into this business, is don't do it until you're 40. Get married, have children, have some money.
Because it costs a lot of money, right?
Learn about life. Just learn about life a bit.
Yeah.
So when you come here, you're not some 20-year-old who really doesn't know what they're talking about. At least you've got something. And it could be anything. It can be a soldiering, it can be a lawyer, it can be a coal miner. It doesn't matter. But some life experience, I think, is crucial here.
Yeah, and live life, and that's part of the reason I do this podcast, because I became increasingly frustrated at the types of people that were selecting themselves into politics, and I think we have an issue in the armed forces community that we deselect from positions. I don't know whether there's this humble or there's this lack of confidence, let's just say, and sometimes you do need people just to say, stop being a victim, Eldrew, and get on with it, get involved. But what was the selection process like? Because that has a bit of a mystique around it. You've got to get on a candidates list. It's a bit like doing the commissions board all over again, I guess.
Well, I was told later by Sir Bernard Jenkins, no less, that I was on a list of 17 MPs or 17 wannabes, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, that David Cameron had instructed under no circumstances do I want them as MPs. So we were really up against it from the start. I didn't know that, of course. It just so happened that the chairman of my association, lovely man called George Preston, ex-RTR, and obviously he knew me because I'm Dorset and I've been on TV down there for 10 years, and he rang me and said, look, we got a new seat, would you consider standing? So I said, well, all right. So I got into it that way, and he was very determined, along with the association committee. They wanted someone who they wanted, not someone who was imposed on them.
Yeah.
And out of the last three, we then had to present to 200 or 300 members of the association, and to my great fortune, they selected me. And interestingly, the George ran the selection process, the final 7, like RCB. So we had challenges throughout the week.
Really?
And all the others, the rest of my competitors say, we don't normally do this, Richard. We normally just have to make a few speeches and then we get, whoever wins that. I said, well, I think George is a bit different. They said, yeah, we don't like this. I suppose you can do this. You've been in the army. And I think one of the most interesting tests he had, which we all failed, he took us into a pub for lunch. We sat down, had the lunch, and at the end of the day, he debriefed us. And he said, you all failed today. So I said, why? I said, well, you were in lunch, were you not? I said, yeah, but we were resting. You were in lunch. There was a barman. There was a single mum with a child. You didn't bother, any of you, to go up and say, hello, how'd you do? I'm Richard Drax. I'm standing for whatever, And he said, and one person argued with him, and he was kicked off straight away. He was fired straight away. And he said, the message I'm giving to all of you, you are never, ever off duty if you become the MP for South Dorset.
Perhaps that's the way we should do it. Sounds sensible to me, because they have psychometric tests and all this good stuff nowadays, the modern stuff, but that is a really good way of doing it, of selection. Yeah, maybe we'll pick that conversation up with other people, and certainly as I look at people coming into the sort of my campaign force community, trying to prepare them for selection, I try to remind them of things that they do know about how they can communicate and mix and talk with all different types of people. So, remember the good bits about you and whatever else you've done in your civilian career as well. Don't forget the stuff that you've learned along the way in your armed forces career.
And just quickly, Johnny, John Robert, I saw him at the party conference some years ago now, and he was giving one of these sideshows, and he was asked, I want you to give me one word, what is conservatism? And without any hesitation, he said freedom. And that stuck with me always. Because in a way, it is the freedom of the individual to lead their lives. Yes, you have a safety net for those who fall into it, but basically it's all about less state, you getting on with your life, the state hopefully creating infrastructure where you can get on with your life, opportunity for all and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought, that's so right. That is what we stand for, freedom.
I think we've all reevaluated our relationship with freedom, haven't we, since COVID-19? That is for sure, and post-Brexit as well. Yeah. So, freedom is a great single word, and one that those of us that have served are very close to as well. But you've been pretty outspoken on a few issues, particularly the vexatious allegations made against members of our armed forces community over various different operations, and you've campaigned on that. Most famously, we saw Brian Wood MC and members of my old regiment, the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment, in the High Court, and the whole Phil Shiner affair, and that is well publicised. But what is going on there? Because the vexatious allegations from our cohort of Northern Ireland veterans, we're now seeing staff through Iraq, Afghanistan, and just keeps going on and on and on. So what's going on there? Can sort of give us an update, and how do we reconcile our own values and standards and how we behave in operations, as well as the need to protect civilians and also abide by the law of armed conflict, quite frankly?
Johnny, that is a really, really good question. You may know I was part of the original team that got Al Blackman, the Royal Marine, his sentence halved from 8 years, which it finally was, to 4. And I remember listening to that case on the radio, and I don't know why. He wasn't in my regiment. I'd never met the man, but after he'd been in jail for a year up in Lincoln, just something kept nagging at me, saying, "Court Martial, the first person for all these years, a man with an exemplary record, what's going on?" So I rang his wife, the lovely Claire, and said, "Look, can I visit your husband?" And I spent 90 minutes with him.
So you went up to Lincoln Prison?
Went to Lincoln Prison, sat with him for 90 minutes, and said, "Tell me your story." So he did, and there's no doubt, having listened to that, an injustice had occurred. I was without doubt. So I rang Claire and I said, "I'm on your side, let's try and help." So we got a team together, which include Freddie Forsyth, the author. I called him the attack dog because he could say things that I couldn't. And we had a top QC, wonderful QC in his team. And we had the Daily Mail, for which I'm entirely grateful. They really stepped up. They raised huge sums of money to pay for his defence, to pay for the lawyer. And for 3.5 years we battled against the MOD to get the Royal Navy report on that tour, and battled against everybody to try and get another hearing. We had to go through this criminal investigation, whatever the court's called, where you get permission to go back, and so you have to submit your case, which the QC did, the CC, whatever it is, the Criminal Cases Review Board, I think it is. They said, yes, we think you've got a case. Went back to the High Court. 5 judges were put onto this. 5 of the top judges in this country, because they knew this was a test case for all veterans, not even veterans, serving too, who'd been found guilty of one thing or another on operations. And in the end, they had not taken into account his state of mind or what was going on. As I said in interviews, we can sit here in our armchairs with gin and tonics and condemn him for shooting that man in cold blood when he'd had half his back taken out by a cannon from a helicopter. And he made the fatal comments, which didn't help his case, admittedly. But he'd seen his friends blown apart. He'd been on tour for 6 months. Very few officers had come out to visit him. He had to walk everywhere. Their nerves were to boiling point. The Royal Marines had not had a good tour, and no disrespect to the Royal Marines, but all regiments, sometimes things don't go quite as well as you want them to, and the report showed they were having problems, morale in particular. And the High Court judge, we went to the final case, and Claire sat beside me, and he gave those wonderful words that I agree with you, that this was not, but I can't remember what the words were, but we got him off, and he must serve half his sentence, 50% remission. So 2 weeks later, at the halfway point, he was released, and we won our case. And I just think for me that was a real reminder of the brave men and women like yourself who go into these appalling environments and need to know that they have the backing of their government and the people they are fighting for. And this case and others, and you mentioned Northern Ireland, and I'm a veteran from there, has shown that I think all too frequently we get forgotten. Now, I'm not saying that people who commit appalling offences should not be punished.
Yeah.
But it has got to be done quickly and efficiently. You cannot wait 50 or 60 years. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday. So when you get the IRA or whoever it is, Sinn Féin, giving evidence 60 years later and saying, well, we saw that person pulling the trigger, how on earth can they remember that? Or whatever the evidence is. It's just a joke. And justice delayed is not justice. So that's got to stop. And Mark Francois and others have fought very hard with the government to get this, and Johnny Mercer, to be fair to him as a minister, have done our best to get this law, this thing changed. We have got somewhere. It was never going to please everybody. And of course, the IRA on the one hand, or the Sinn Féin and everybody else, and they're not happy. And in some cases, the military is not happy either. But I think we have got to a point now that if they look into a case and there is no evidence, that is it, finish. They can't be chased in 10 years' time or 20 years' time. And they can die peacefully, unlike some, sadly, who've died not wondering whether they can be found guilty or not. But as I say, if you have committed a crime, and that American case in Vietnam where that young officer went rogue and they just attacked the village and raped and killed.
The My Lai massacre as well. Yeah,
exactly. That is completely unacceptable. Of course it is. And we like to think, and our soldiers are trained to a pitch where they do behave themselves. And after the fog of war and the battles died down, as the Falklands proved, and the Scots Guards on Tumbledown, and I know many friends who were there, they said, Richard, during that fight we would have bayoneted, killed, thrown a grenade, whatever it was we had to do.
Yeah, war's
the end.
Awful.
The first thing we did was go and deal with the wounded, ours and theirs. And we were kneeling down beside wounded and said, "It's okay, mate. We're going to patch you up." And that's the extraordinary thing about the British Army, the British soldier. They are a remarkable, remarkable person, and in 99.9% of cases, they serve with huge honour. So we've got to have a system back here that respects the risks they take, while at the same time challenging them if things do go wrong. There's no doubt about that.
So heading in the right direction. I think where we're trying to get to
it's better now than what it was.
Yeah. I guess the message being
better now.
The government has our back, essentially.
Yes. But of course, as you well know, Johnny, whenever you go out to fight, we had Northern Ireland and you in Northern Ireland and out in Afghanistan, and of course in Iraq, your hands are tied behind your back by some rule or regulation or other. And I've heard 2 accounts of people who saw the Taliban laying bombs in the road, couldn't shoot them because they weren't actually causing any harm to them at the time.
I'm smirking because
this is madness.
Yeah, at the time I was in Afghanistan, it was the whole courageous restraint narrative of if you weren't posed a threat, but you knew they were. It went through various different phases, that campaign, where it was very kinetic, but we were at that point where we were handing over to the Afghans. It was a very sensitive time, but you knew full well individuals had just done something, but obviously you then couldn't do the thing that you would ordinarily do as a soldier because of the laws at the time. But I guess the message being, as I said, is that ultimately those that are wishing to go and serve, having the confidence that our nation that we do serve has our back, the government of the day has our back, going forward for those dangerous situations.
It also puts a huge onus, and on the whole they are good, on senior officers and warrant officers, of course. Now these warrant officers and sergeants and others have got 10 to 20 years experience, and the army has always relied, and certainly the young officers have relied on their sergeants to keep them in thing. And that's why I think the British Army is so good. The system is designed to look after each other, and that's good. What we've got to do as politicians is make sure that we totally respect that system and back it up. But as I say, if it's clearly obvious and there's evidence to say something's gone wrong, then that case has to be looked into. It has to be.
Which is why it's a good idea to have 1 or 2 of those who've served in the armed forces in this place for that insight. But as we go forward, we seem to be in deeply political times. The word crisis gets thrown about. There are so many issues affecting our daily lives at the moment, and we're getting faster and faster towards a general election, and we know it's going to happen next year. What do you think are going to be the key issues that will win or lose this election going into that in the next few months?
I think there's going to have to be an understanding, and we hope there will, that the electorate understand the situation that this government is in. We haven't got everything right. I wouldn't for 1 minute say we have. and I didn't agree with the lockdowns. I voted against all three. One of only 15 on the first, and I was accused of being a murderer and goodness knows what. So I'm not blaming the government for locking us down. I'm not blaming the government for splurging £400 billion of money to keep the trains running, the hospitals running, everyone in work, or not allowed to work, but certainly their income. And we're now paying a really terrible price for that. We've got no room for manoeuvre financially. And I am aghast. My grandfather, who was a great writer, actually, funny enough, Admiral Drax, and I found a whole lot of leaflets which I read, and it's absolutely fascinating. And he talks about a country that loses faith with the Christian faith. I'm not a huge God basher, but I believe in the Christian faith and all its teachings. He talks about service, and the moment people, whoever they may be, the postman, the doctor, the railway, the train driver, the moment you lose that sense of serving, then the country's in trouble. Now, I accept that people are feeling the pinch. They feel they should have had pay rises and all this sort of stuff. I totally get it. But 35%, for example, of my doctors is just ridiculous, when actually they end up being paid extremely well. So I would have thought they're an example where they're sworn to serve and save life. So why are you on strike for 5 days and risking the very people you've sworn to protect? I find that very hard to cope with. Rather similarly, the armed forces who can't strike, and wouldn't, I don't think, because they are serving their country and their king, and us, of course. So I think, and this is where I think things are going wrong, I see the nation wobbling, the wokeness, the trans issues, all these, the way children are being taught, all this stuff, the online pornography, which is incredibly pernicious to the young now, the breakdown of communication between the young and between men and women. I just see so many things that I'm very, very concerned about, and I'm not quite sure how to put it right. I certainly can't do it on my own. It needs the nation to wake up and say, hang on, look, things are not going right. I'm a train driver on £60,000. All right, I should have had a pay rise, I haven't. But the government has bailed me out for 2 years, and I've still got a job and a train to drive. I'm going to serve on and swallow that instinct for more money. The nurses, I do think they have a case. Bless their socks, they do this amazing job looking after us all. But there again, the NHS, most political parties now are saying it's time for reform. It simply isn't working. And with an ageing population, a growing population, and the cost of equipment and all the rest of it, and treatment going through the roof, we can't go on. So let's have a look at this. Let's sit down and forget it's this sort of, cult. We worship the NHS and say, let's try and make it as efficient as we can. Try our best to keep it free at the point of delivery, certainly for the less well off, certainly. But if there's scope for those who are better off, maybe to pay something, I think this should be looked at. We may not conclude that, but at least we should have the courage, all of us, to say it's time to relook at things. We've got all these quangos from Natural England, the Environment Agency and everything else, which I totally disagree with, because all we have done here is delegate our responsibilities as elected members to people who are unelected, unaccountable for. And you end up, guess what, then being run by people that, in often many cases, we just simply don't agree with. And what can we do? Nothing. They shut down this or shut down that. Natural England has shut down building because of this threat to the waterways and everything else. Now, you could argue maybe they're right, but one letter shut down a whole millions of pounds worth of investment in homes and things. So surely we should bring all that back into government departments so that we as elected members can run the country. And if we get it wrong, yes, we get kicked out. And not delegate our responsibilities to unaccountable people who are costing us billions of pounds. And the armed forces, there's no doubt. I'm very concerned about this. I know Ben Wallace is too. He's now going, as we all know. He himself said the army's been hollowed out. He himself says, I'd love to keep it at 80,000, but if we do, we'll have to arm everybody with pitchforks because the budget is this. And it's too small. It's too small. And what I would think we should do as a government, it being a top priority for any government, is say, right, what do we need to maintain the safety of the realm? let's work it out. We need tanks, planes, ships. We need that to do the role we have. How much does all that cost? I don't know, 100 billion. Okay, we can't afford that. We're currently paying 50 billion. We can't afford that. But we can afford more than 50 billion because we need to have a fighting division if, God forbid, we need it. And Ben Wallace is predicting a major conflict by 2030. We need enough aeroplanes to keep going. We certainly need more ships if we're to secure our waterways, not least over in the Far East, and monitor Russia in the North Atlantic, who've really increased their activity up there. So all these things you would have thought should be done, rather than just saying, oh, it should be 3%, 4%, 5%. It's nonsensical. Let's work out what we need to have, how much it costs, and then go back from that. It's the simple army appreciation. We're not doing it. And I find it all very frustrating.
So there's a lot to take to the electorate as we approach this general election.
There is. Yeah.
All to fight for as well. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I don't envy the task of my old job as a campaigner on the ground, that's for sure. And the messaging, the sound bites that all fall out of that in order to try and simplify it on the doorstep and on social media. It's an enormous challenge for politicos at the moment. But we'll wait and see with bated breath. But you're looking forward to restanding the next election?
I have said I've been
selected.
Selected, yeah. I have. I'm going to wait a bit longer for the final decision to be made. I was very impressed when Jacob said, Richard, please stay with us, you're only 56. And I said, Jacob, I'm very impressed you think I am. I'm actually 65. And he went, are you? And I said, yes. He didn't look it. I said, well, as long as you keep saying that, I'm very happy. But I am 65, and it's a time of your life where I've got grandchildren coming, a large family, a home to look after, and all these things. And I've done plus the 13 years, 17 years now in this game. And yes, there's a part of me that I love this job, don't get me wrong. I'm very fond of my seat and the many, many constituents who are, they're fantastic. And I've met so many nice people. But one has to make a decision in life, and I haven't made that decision yet because it's too soon. So that is yet to be made. But it could be to stay, it might be to go, who knows?
Who knows? Watch this space.
I never say.
Watch this space. And any kind of final bits of advice for those that might be looking at following you into politics or local government? We always talk up local government on this show, that's for sure.
Yes, I think that there is a lot of room for ex-forces people. I think people are now appreciating people who've served a lot more than they did in my day, because you're much more in the public eye. There's Iraq, Afghanistan, helping aid to the civil power, which we've done a lot of. There's a pandemic where we saw the army everywhere, and of course the Navy and everybody else, Air Force, contributing. So, and the mentality of those who left the armed forces are so positive, and they've got the training, the background, the intelligence, and everything else to really fit in anywhere they want. So yes, government per se, or MPs, or local councillors, or helping out in some way, or even becoming an official local council, but also other areas too. Let's not forget the police force. And I raised this with the policing minister only last week, having spoken to the Dorset police, with whom I do a lot of work. And they say, Richard, we want more ex-forces, but they won't come in because the salary is X after 20 years, and they come in on 17,000, 18,000 with 3 children. Who's going to do that?
Need a degree and all this kind of stuff.
No, they've dropped that.
I've dropped that. Oh, good.
What we need is recognition of the time, and they come in on a far higher salary. So it may be a slight drop, but then with promises of promotion, which they would get because they are ex-armed forces. And a lot of people I speak to say, we would welcome this. We really miss, because the mentality is there. A lot of the new recruits apparently are coming in, going onto the street, being spat at and sworn at and possibly thumped, and saying, oh, I don't want that. They just don't have the training. So there are many other areas other than just local government and major, and primary government here, that members of the armed forces could go and help with. And of course there's the prison service too, where a lot of people used to go and join. Some still do. So there's a raft of areas, I would have thought. And let's not forget farming. You know, I mean, it's a country life. It's a wonderful life, and we need people who have the right attitude. Finding young people to come into agriculture, forestry nowadays is almost impossible.
Well, there's a whole movement, Forces Farming Jobs as well. I don't know if you've heard of them. There's a few organisations that are that bridge into the agricultural sector. But I think, really, to sum it up, it's stand up and serve again. Use that word service.
And teaching.
We can go on.
Desperately need
public spirited
teachers.
People.
Yeah.
So much potential.
Yeah.
Obviously, we evangelise over politics in this particular podcast, but at the same time, we also nod to other areas of our society where those, once you leave, to use those values, the service, and to go and thrive in these different areas.
Absolutely.
So I think on that positive note, we will leave the podcast for today. Richard Drax MP, thank you very much. Really appreciated talking to you. It's been absolutely fascinating.
And Johnny, thank you, and thank you for all your service too. Very grateful to you and all your colleagues for what you've done for us all.
Well, thank you. Cheers. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.